We have one viewer tonight who has made the comment that he's had experience now with real love for about 3 months, and that at times it's been great, and at others he feels bad because he can't use his old behaviors. Of course, we can always use our old behaviors, but there is that sort of disorienting time when we haven't quite gotten the hang of using real love yet. We don't have enough sources of real love. We don't yet feel enough unconditional love. We're not yet unconditionally loving enough. And yet, and we want to go back to using imitation love, but they don't have the same allure that they used to. Now we know what they are. Now we know that they're harmful, destructive, selfish, hurtful. So, you know, it's kind of hard to use them like we used to, although we still do. But now we feel guilty about it, and it's just not quite the same pleasure. So I understand that. And there is that kind of in-between time where we grow into real love while we're learning to let go of imitation love and let go of getting and protecting behavior. So you're not alone in this. We all go through that. And it's that in-between time that is the greatest cause of people falling away from real love. They come, they investigate the principles, and, oh, shoot, 90% of people who go to a seminar, read the book, say, wow, this is great. But we lose a huge number of people when they realize that the transformation in their lives isn't going to take place in 3 hours, that it takes more than that they're actually going to have to persist, that they're going to have to tell the truth about themselves consistently, that it's going to take gathering real love over a period of weeks, months, maybe longer, that they're going to have to be, if they're in a relationship, for example, that they will have to be the one who makes the decision to be different rather than relying on their partner to be the one who's going to be different. So it's a tough thing being the one who's going to change. And making that transition doesn't happen just poof overnight. But if we stick with it, I can tell you that those who do, those who exercise the faith and courage to stay with the process, it works every time. The only people that the process of real love fails for are the people who quit. So keep going. I was reading in the news today that there's an Australian swimmer named Ian Thorpe who has won 5 Olympic gold medals and 11 gold medals in world championships. The kid's just a phenomenon. 24 years old, and from the time he's been 14 years old, he has been on the Australian national team. And the Australian national team is a phenomenal team. I mean, they have, over the years, won more medals, I believe, than any team other than the United States. And considering the size of the country, that's quite an achievement. So this kid's been a real phenomenon. And, you know, here he is at the peak of his career, has an opportunity to set more world records, win more Olympic gold medals, win more world championships. And he has a press conference in Australia where the room is packed with reporters. And he announces that, you know, despite all these accomplishments and accolades and all this praise and adoration, he says, my life's out of balance. He said, you know, when I think about my life away from swimming, he says, I feel dark. And he said, I go back to swimming for a sense of safety, a sense of accomplishment. It's where he feels comfortable. What he's describing, it's such an excellent description, especially from a 24-year-old kid, of how we use imitation love. And here at the age of 24, he's already realized, of course he's been doing it for 10 years or more, he's already realized that no matter how much he gets, you couldn't get more praise in a field than he's gotten. He's beaten everybody. And he realizes that despite all that, that's not going to make him happy. So he realizes he's going to have to look for something else. And that's what he's in the process of doing. Whether he'll discover that love is the answer, who knows? But he's at least smart enough to realize that this particular form of imitation love isn't the key. Now, a lot of people realize that, but what they do is they bounce from one form of imitation love to the other. So a man, for example, who's been especially successful in his career with power and money and praise may then, at age 40, 45, decide to run off with his secretary. So instead of power and praise, he decides, well, maybe if I switch to pleasure, maybe that will make me happy. Pretty much like alcoholics who, crazy as it sounds, switch from whiskey to beer, thinking that somehow that will change their addiction. As crazy as it sounds, it seems to make sense to the addict at the time, and really that's what most of us do with our addictions to imitation love. They always wear off. We always get to the point where they seem fruitless, and then we figure, well, I'll try something else and maybe that will work. Not realizing that none of them work. No form of imitation love will ever make us happy. But you know, if we don't know about real love, what else we got? What else have we got to do except bounce from one form of imitation love to the other? And so we do. And it's pretty fruitless, but it's all we got. I had a son who was a championship swimmer in high school, and set virtually all the records in his region and high school, and he was a junior in high school. And in his senior year, they anticipated that he'd go and set records at the state meets, and he was going to be a big deal. But he had received enough unconditional love at home that when he got to his senior year, he said, Dad, I think I'd rather take a pottery class. And we said, well, cool, whatever. He said, well, my coach is going to be mad and my teammates are going to be mad. Well, so what? So he did, and he had a great time. Took a pottery class. I think he worked backstage in a play his senior year. He kind of goofed off, actually, his senior year. And he had a great time with his friends and just enjoyed himself. He realized that he didn't have to succeed. He wasn't compelled to win for the praise and the power to please anybody. And, that's freedom. Not being a prisoner to getting and protecting behaviors and to imitation love. So what a sense of freedom. And I hope young Ian Thorpe discovers such a freedom. I got a letter from a lady just the other day who wanted me to intervene with her daughter. Daughter was 21 years old, and her daughter has been increasingly rebellious and angry and spent less and less time with her mother and has gravitated more and more to a boyfriend who is, well, not a very nice kid. Drunk driver, drinks a lot, some use of drugs, not very nice to the daughter, somewhat physically abusive. It's been a pretty ugly situation. And the mother wrote to me saying, we'd like you to, because she heard that the daughter was reading the book Real Love, and so she wanted me to intervene and tell her daughter how stupid she was being. And the mother gave me a copy of a letter that she'd sent to her daughter. This letter was a horror story. She went on and on about how terrible her daughter was. Now, she couched it in a language of love. She said to her daughter, "We love you so much, and we love you so much, we want you to see how horrible these things are that you're doing. We are aghast," she said, "at the terrible mistakes you're making. Look at the horrible life you're leading. She just went on and on. She just tore her daughter up." Well, I said, with that kind of criticism, it's little wonder that your daughter would leave you. and would go and find imitation love in the form of sex, praise, power, and so on from a boyfriend because she's not getting unconditional love from you. And in your letter, even though you say you love her, with your behavior, you're saying you don't. You're saying that we will accept you only if you change your behavior. And so actually you're driving your daughter away. And I suggested to the mother that unless she paid attention to her own behavior, this situation was only going to get worse. The mother did not write back. She was looking for somebody to agree with her and control her daughter. And as long as that is our goal, and as long as the people around us don't feel unconditionally loved, we'll just drive them further away from us. Here's a question. Do you feel that people who find real love are directed to it by God, or do we just happen upon it? Well, you know, there's a divine guiding hand in everything. And which times we just stumble upon things and which times we're guided, oh, I'm not smart enough to know which times are which. But I can tell you that, you know, this divine guiding hand cares about all of us. We are literally God's children. And as much as I care about the happiness of my children, I'm a fool. I'm a beginner at loving. God's much better at loving us than I am at loving my children. And if I love my children enough to give them the very best that I can, imagine how careful God is to arrange things in our lives so that we find what will make us happier. So it would be not too difficult to imagine that God would arrange it so that we stumble across real love. And we've seen examples of this over and over again, where people in their lives have come to us and said, you know, I got to the place in my life where I knew I needed something, and poof, in the next moment, somebody introduced them to the book, or somebody introduced them to the concepts, or it's no coincidence that that happens. And then it works the other way. The more that we learn about real love, the closer people find themselves drawing to God. So there really is a divine pattern in all of this, and that should be no great surprise. I was asked, did your son's quitting swimming have an effect on his future education? So, you know, because some people would object and say, well, now, so if you let your son quit swimming, then does he then become a quitter for the rest of his life? Does it become a pattern? We really don't trust our kids. We treat them like they're morons. We treat them as though if we don't control them, they won't do the right thing. And I'm here to tell you that they will. So all they need from us is our unconditional love and support and our guidance. So we guide them. We teach them principles. We say you need to learn self-discipline. You need to learn persistence. These are the things you need to learn in your life. But we don't tell them what they have to do with those principles from moment to moment. He decided that, sure, he needed to persist, but he decided that he'd rather persist in learning pottery. Now, who am I to know whether his persisting in swimming or learning pottery is more important? This is critical that we get. How would I know that? How many people are going to end up making a living as swimmers? Understand? So, on average, it's been discovered that people end up in a final career, only 15% of the time does their final career exactly correspond to the undergraduate degree that they got in college. So people change their minds all the time. Why then should we tell a child who's 15 years old, you have to stick with something that you decided to do when you're 12 for the rest of your life? Which of us is smart enough to know that that's the right thing for a child to do? So we might say to a child, for example, if you're going to take karate lessons or piano lessons or whatever, Part of the agreement of taking piano lessons is to at least find out whether you have a talent for it, whether you're good at it, take it long enough to discover whether it's something you can do. So you might make an agreement that you would have to persist in doing it for 6 months, some period of time that would qualify as persistence or having actually tried it. But after that period of time, who am I to tell a child that he should stick with it for years and years? So did it affect his final education? No. Now, did it affect his scholarship? Sure. By his not persisting in swimming, for example, he could have gotten a scholarship to college in swimming. That required that I pay more for his college than I would otherwise have paid. That still doesn't give me the right to control his life. Do you see that? Many times parents will say, well, but if he does this, he'll get a scholarship. He'll become rich and famous. Well, but we don't have a right to make that determination for them. All of us learn by exercising our own choices. And as long as people make our choices for us, we don't learn and grow. So if that works for us, it works for them. Our children grow as they make their own choices and as they make their own mistakes. We're not supposed to save them from all their mistakes. Even if I see a child doing something that I'm thinking, that's probably not the right thing to do. Now, short of, playing on the interstate when they're 4 years old, that's a mistake where the consequences are unnecessarily high. But on the whole, that's how they learn. That's how we learn. And so we've got to be very careful about intervening with our children or anybody else for that matter and telling them what to do. Because the consequences of controlling people are worse than not controlling them and having them learn from their own mistakes. We had a conference in Phoenix a couple weeks ago, and since that time we've received a fair amount of emails, phone calls from people describing that the conference really motivated them to start making more and more contacts, phone calls, visits to their real love groups than they had been making. And it's made quite a difference to them. There's nothing like the power of feeling loved. Talking about it is interesting intellectual exercise, but we need to feel it. And these people are reaching out now and making much more significant changes in their lives. I've been talking to one man recently who's been involved in real love for 3 years, and recently he's begun to understand that he has not been sufficiently reaching out and getting loved by people. And in part, he was obstructed by what he called pride, meaning he felt like he was too proud to reach out and tell the truth about himself to other people. But really, pride is a word that we use to hide fear. Because what he was really afraid of was that he would reach out to other people and look stupid or not feel loved. And it's fear that kills us. It's fear that keeps us from reaching out and telling the truth. It's fear that keeps us from feeling loved, even when we're getting it. Fear really keeps us alone and keeps us from growing. The question here is, can our lack of real love be characterized as an immature behavior? Oh, sure, absolutely. The way we were meant to be is unconditionally loving, to be rich and fulfilled, to be unconditionally loving people all the time. When you really understand what real love is, and you see somebody, no matter who they are, a 55-year-old, 250-pound man, and he's angry at somebody, what does he really look like? He looks like a 4-year-old having a tantrum. It's immature, selfish behavior. Every time somebody gets angry, what they're really saying is, look at me, look what you didn't do for me, look what you did to me. And that's pretty immature behavior. Whereas mature, whole, fulfilled behavior is, what can I do for you? What can we do to work together to progress toward a goal? So yes, it's very immature. And in fact, often I will say to people, as I'm learning and growing, I'm just frankly in the process of growing up. I feel like I'm growing up all the time. Every time I behave other than in a loving way, I'm behaving like a child. I had an experience yesterday that I thought would be an interesting metaphor. I have over and over again seen people experience the initial effects of real love and get very excited about them, but then they go away. And people have asked me, so what's the deal? Yesterday I was burning, well actually it was a couple weeks ago, I was trying to burn a burn pile. We have a large yard out there, and we had stacked up, sticks and logs and branches that we'd pruned off of trees around the yard here, and the pile was probably, I don't know, probably 8 feet high and probably 25 feet long and probably 8 feet wide. It was a big pile. And we went out and we tried to light the pile on fire. So we took some newspapers and stuffed it down in the pile and lit the fire and threw gas on the fire. I don't know if you've ever thrown gas on a fire, but it's very exciting. Those of us who are still little boys at heart love to do that. And when you throw gas on a fire, I mean, it is like an explosion. So boom, this gas blows up. And I mean, we had fire booming 20 feet into the air. Well, I did this over and over again with the gasoline. Probably threw 3 gallons of gasoline on the fire. That is a lot of fuel. And after throwing 3 gallons of gasoline on this fire, it did nothing. The sticks, the branches, and so on were so green that initial flash of heat would just heat the outer edges, and then it would go out. So I see that same effect over and over with human beings. They're introduced to real love, they're very excited, they get all hot on the outside, and then the fire goes out. So the other day I decided to do something different. This was yesterday. So I went out and I took a wheelbarrow full of oak that was seasoned and dry, and I made a fire in the middle of this great big burn pile. Now this fire burned much more slowly than the gas, much more. And it burned hot and steady for a good while. And I started putting bit by bit sticks from the green burn pile on it. And it took, I don't know, probably 20 minutes, half an hour of adding sticks to this fire, which was burning steadily and heating up the green branches. And before long, we had a blazing fire. This fire was 30 feet in the air, and you couldn't get within 30 feet of it. It took that steady, burning blaze in the middle to get this going. That initial flash in the pan was worthless. And that's the advantage of having wise men and women in our lives. Hearing the principles, experiencing that first moment of unconditional love doesn't last. We have to get the influence of real love in our lives day after day after day, and bit by bit, we lose the greenness and we start to catch fire ourselves, and then it spreads the fire to those around us. But it really takes a steady effort. A flash is just never enough. Let's see, we have a question here. It says, So when we give up the right to have our way, we begin to be able to give up this right. It's because we have acquired enough real love. Oh, sure. Not being loving, as you suggested earlier, is an immaturity. It's a selfishness. But notice there's no condemnation about that. Notice I don't say not being loving is selfish and stop it. No, it's just selfish. And we're selfish only because we're so empty and needy and afraid. And so we can't think of other people. When somebody's drowning, they can't think of somebody else. They can't think of anybody but themselves. So there's no blaming to it. I was talking to a man just the other day, and he was saying that, he's beginning to get unconditional love from other men in his real love group. He's getting love on his conference calls. And he said with some irritation, but I never get it from my wife. No, and you wouldn't. She has investigated the principles of real love very little. She understands them very little. She's received very little real love in her life. So how in the world would she love you? She can't. So we have to learn to not expect real love from people who don't have it. As she gets more unconditional love in her life, bit by bit, she'll be able to give some to him, maybe, to some other people, to whoever. But we really can't give up getting things our way until we start to get a little bit of reservoir ourselves and lose some of that emptiness, until we start to begin to get some of the $20 million. Here's somebody who said that, I think it's a she, not sure. Yes, it is. She was at her in-laws for dinner, and her 10-year-old was putting 10 teaspoons of olive oil on his bread. And I said, that's enough. And he continued to pour it on. And my husband then said, it's okay, because it's healthy. Pick your things to fight about, really. I learned this with a group of Boy Scouts that I taught for years and years. I had an enormous group of Boy Scouts, so big that we had to buy a school bus to take these kids wherever we went. There were 25 to 30 kids every time we went anywhere. And there was one adult leader, just me. And I discovered this. We had 3 rules on our team. You don't hurt anybody's property. You don't hurt anybody's feelings. And when I'm talking, you ain't. And that's it. I discovered that if you keep the rules very simple, and you're not constantly telling them, do this and don't that, that then when you do tell them what matters, they listen to you very intently. Do you know how they discover that it's too much oil? They discover that it's too much oil by using too much oil. No kidding. I sat in a restaurant once, and my wife, Donna, was with me, and there was a lady sitting behind us, and I'm not kidding you, in the process of 15 minutes, she corrected this kid no less than 30 times. Pick up your fork this way, hold it this way, don't open your milk that way, don't drink too fast, don't eat too fast, eat faster. She went from eat faster, it was making me crazy. If we people actually have a meter inside their heads about the law of choice. We know that our most inalienable right is to make our own choices. We know that. And the more people control it, the more rebellious and angry we become. No kidding. Absolutely. Freedom is the thing. People have fought wars, fought to the death, gone to prison over it. And the more we control people, the more we will drive them away. So, if a kid's using too much oil, now, what if he does it repeatedly? Then you might say, how would you like to handle this? You can use all the oil that you want to, but you will have to pay for the oil that you use. Because the normal amount is this amount, and so with your allowance, you can buy your own oil, only because you use oil excessively. So you just do it like that, just as calm as can be. Everybody else uses the normal amount. You use a gallon. And so olive oil, it turns out, is $8.95 a gallon or whatever it is. And so you'll buy your own. We don't care how much you use. See how calm that is? Instead of, don't do that. Stop that. Don't move in your chair. We had a kid in our family who couldn't sit still in his chair. And a couple of times every meal, this kid would just be antsing around in his chair, and he would fall off the chair onto the floor. Now you would think, how could somebody not sit on their own chair? Well, the natural consequence of a kid who can't sit still in his chair is what? He falls on the floor, and it hurts. Let him fall on the floor. Why tell him to sit still? Let him figure out the consequences of fidgeting around on his chair. So I say control them less. We think it's important. It's not. They will figure it out. No kidding. And if they don't, you apply natural consequences. Another person says, I understand, but it's hard sometimes when people we love and give to don't see it as such and are not grateful and manipulate us to gain more, or it feeds their ego. That's a great question. I got a call just the other day from a lady who said that, you know, she has been consistently trying to unconditionally love somebody in her family. And she reaches out and she does something for this person, and this person sees it as clinging, as being rewarded for her manipulations, as she sees it as imitation love. And somebody in her real love group said, well, you've got to stop doing that. You've got to stop loving this person because she takes it the wrong way. No, you don't. Our goal is to practice being unconditionally loving. And it doesn't matter how other people take it. That's very important. Remember that. We're not in charge of other people. We have to let go of that. So if somebody else takes it wrong and they say, oh, well, you're just weak. So if I practice being loving, I will be happier every time. And I can tell you that 80-90% of the time, if I'm consistently loving, the people around me will eventually get the point. They will. There have been times when, for example, there's been a conflict between myself and somebody else, or somebody else, at least they thought they were in conflict with me. I refused to be in conflict. They were spreading rumors about me. And people have said to me, well, you need to correct these rumors. No, I don't. No, I don't. I just need to be loving. Well, people will think you're weak. I don't care. Why should I care? My goal is to be loving. Now, it may take a while, but in the end, people will recognize love. And you will always be happier. So, is this making sense to you? The person that asked the question? Don't you worry about how other people take it. You worry about being loving. That's always the most powerful force. Holiday time. Is it okay to encourage my husband to answer his family's frequent, sometimes frantic, imitation love calls? I don't think I'm running. I'm not entirely understanding that, so I'm going to give it a try. So I'm guessing you mean that you're, now help me out with this if I don't get this right. I'm guessing that your husband's family calls and demands attention. Is that what you're telling me? And that you encourage him to take care of those calls. Help me if I'm headed down the wrong path here. I guess what I would suggest to you is, why do you encourage him to do anything? Let him do whatever he wants to do. If his family is calling and making demands, what is that to you? You be as loving as you choose to be. But telling him what he needs to do with them is, really none of your business. And I've seen this over and over again. I mean, you know, around holiday times especially, holiday times are just living hell in most families, aren't they? I mean, they're terrible. Families call and they demand that you come and do this, and they demand you do that, and aren't you coming over, and aren't we going to do presents this way, and aren't we? I'm guessing that your husband's family does this. Stay out of it. Now, if he comes to you and he says, what can I do? You could offer a real love solution. You could say, sweetie, you're not obligated to do anything. Because you've got to remember that when people feel like victims, because you're describing victims, victims are constantly saying, why haven't you done this for me? Why haven't you done this? Why blah, 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 blah. You will never satisfy a victim. So why should you jump on the field of death with them? Why should you get excited? When somebody calls me and they say, you haven't called, the instant I jump into the conversation with them and go to defend myself, now we're both on the field of death. Do you see that? The instant they say to me, why didn't you, they're on the field of death. Just because they're inviting me onto the field of death doesn't mean I have to go. I prefer to stay on the field of life and simply say, oh, what would you like? Rather than defend myself. I'm not going to defend what I've done. And they say, well, I'd like you to call more often. And I say, well, you know, I'll think about that. But pretty much I'm calling as often as I'm calling because that's how often I like to call. And so you got two ways you can go. And I really talk to people like this. I say, you can enjoy the calls that I make, or you can resent the calls that I make and wish that they were more. The one way, you'll be happy. The one way, you won't. But either way, I'm happy. What do you want to do? It's very puzzling to people to watch somebody who's on the field of life and absolutely won't get on the field of death with them. And we don't have to. Just because somebody says, oh, come join me, you don't have to go. You really don't. Now, additional comment here. My husband's family are waiting for callbacks, and we're having fun applying the real love concepts and are supporting each other through this. Good for you. See, the more demands that people make, it turns out that the less likely it is you will ever make them happy. So do you begin to see the picture here? If I come to you and I say, do more for me, you're in a position now where, you know, it doesn't really matter what you do now. The more I whine, the less it matters what you do. I'm going to be unhappy no matter what. So pretty much you could just go to sleep on your end and leave me unhappy, because I'm going to be unhappy either way. Why should you exert yourself more to get essentially no results? You'll never satisfy a victim. Let me encourage you, in fact. If you're interested, anybody who is, I just finished a book about victimhood, real love and something, freedom for the soul, eliminating the chains of victimhood. And if you're interested in that, email me and I'll send you a copy of that. And it talks for 450 pages about how to respond to victims, because victims are absolutely unsatisfiable. And once you understand what they're doing, you can eliminate the chains that victims are constantly trying to forge around you. You do not have to be trapped by victims. Now, back to olive oil. Do I say anything to my husband later about contradicting me in front of the child, or do I just let it be? It seems to be worse to contradict the other parent. It's always a horrifying effect to have one parent contradict the other in front of the kids. And so what I would do is say to my husband this: never focus on the details. This is where everything goes right off the rail. The train goes right off the tracks and everybody's dead. So you don't get into the argument of whether there was too much oil or there wasn't. Who cares? what you say is, Fred, it doesn't matter whatever your husband's name is, you say, look, I may have been wrong about the oil. Irrelevant. We'll figure out the oil later. But when I say something to one of the kids, or even when you say something to one of the kids, my suggestion is that it's probably very confusing to them when the two of us contradict the other. And so that issue's over. I don't even care to talk about that one. See, if you hash over an issue that happened, he'll defend himself. So you don't talk about that. He'll feel like he has to say, well, but I only meant... Talk about a principle. People tend not to argue so much about true principles. So you say, I think it would be really helpful if the two of us just simply never contradict the other in front of the kids. So if I say something to the kids that is just stupid, would you mind correcting me later when the kids aren't there? Even if I'm wrong, I think it would be better for the kids if you told me afterward. And I'll do the same for you. He'll be able to hear that a lot more easily than if you come to him and say, you were wrong about that. Make sense? Here's a man who says, I'm divorced and have since learned about real love. I have trouble forgetting about some of her behavior that helped cause our divorce and that she will not admit to. She gets livid. Who cares what she did? Really? It's like this. I was divorced 10 years ago. And when people say to me, why were you divorced? I say, because I wasn't loving enough. Isn't that the truth? The only truth that matters is the truth about who? Me. Other people's mistakes are, get this, none of my stinking business. I mean that. Because what good does it do? Now, did my ex-wife make mistakes? Well, frankly, my answer is still, it's none of my business. Do you see? Who does it help? What if I were to give you a catalog of her mistakes? Who would benefit from that? You wouldn't, she wouldn't, and I wouldn't. So, who would be the idiot to give you the list? Me. Makes no sense. Just like when I talk about my children's errors or my children's pain in their lives. I don't ever say the pain and the mistakes in my children's lives are because of the mistakes that we, my ex-wife and I, made. No, I say they're a result of the mistakes I made. Because her mistakes are none of my business. What do I care what she did? Did your ex-wife make mistakes? I'm sure she made a million. And since she's none of your business, since you're never going to change her, any effort, any, that you spend on talking about her, changing her, anything, is kind of wasted, isn't it? So it's really about what's practical and what works and what makes us happy. And we get to just let it go. We're not dismissing it. She made them. Got it. Let's say that we could prove with videotape that she made 73% of the mistakes in your marriage, and you only made 27. So, where are you? Are you any better off? Because for the rest of your life, the only thing you have to work on are those 27% of the mistakes. Do you see? So I can only talk about mine. Those are the only ones I care about. I don't care what mistakes other people make. They're irrelevant to me. Not that they don't exist. And you certainly never want to bring them up to her. I mean, haven't we all proven that that's like insane? And yet we keep doing it? Here, now, I'd like to bring up to you in more careful language the mistakes you made in our marriage. Like that's going to work. We've tried it 50 times before and it didn't work, but we're going to try it this time. So anybody have any more questions about divorces or holidays or olive oil? Wonderful questions because they apply to so many things. And if not, it's been a wonderful 50 minutes, and I'm grateful for the time that we had together. Please pass this on to your friends. And the next time that we get together, bring your questions with you, and we'll... Oh, here we go. One more question. What if she keeps bringing them up and wants me to pretend that they didn't happen? So the question is, what if your ex-wife keeps bringing up her mistakes or keeps bringing up your mistakes and wants you to pretend that her mistakes never happened? Let her. Who cares? I have participated in many conversations where I have said to people, you know, I really apologize for the mistakes that I made. And they made a ton of mistakes in the same situation. And they didn't bring up any of their mistakes. I don't care. The only happiness I'm in charge of in my life is whose? Mine. That's all I've got. If I chain my life to fixing your happiness, I'm dead. I had an opportunity once to talk to a man who had been singularly hateful to myself, to my family, just destructive. It was like his life's mission to hurt us. In fact, I had heard secondhand from another person that he had said that it was his goal to hurt us. But I had been also angry at him. And so I ran across him a couple of years later. He'd moved away. And I said to him, I want to apologize for how difficult I made your life during that time. And his response to me was, now mind you, although I had made his life difficult, he had been extraordinarily hateful. And I was sincere about my apology. He said, you sure did. And just as hateful as could be, he stomped out of the room. I wasn't expecting him to apologize. And I felt free of my burden of being angry at him. I don't need other people to apologize to me or to admit their faults. And if I have that need, if I need you to admit your faults to me, I'm chained to you forever. Do you see that? I'm stuck. If my happiness is in any way linked to your behavior, I'm doomed. So you have to let your ex-wife grow in whatever way she chooses to grow. It's literally none of your business. And when you really get that, oh, freedom and joy, honey. You're free. Here's somebody who says, I feel as though I will completely drown. Oh, whoops, back up. My husband is still very angry and is really acting out, and I can't get enough love to stay loving, no matter how hard I work at it. I just start to get out of the pool, and then I feel like I start drowning. I feel as though I will completely drown before I can get enough love to get out of the pool. Oh, boy. I just want to catch a breath. This is one of the hardest questions there is. So, relax, take a breath, and listen to this. In great measure, you feel responsible for loving your husband. And you do have some measure of responsibility to love him. But by far, your first responsibility is to get loved and be happy. And you have to be willing to do whatever it takes so that you can be loved, stable, happy, loving, all of those things before you're in any kind of position to deal with him consistently. It's kind of like, I've worked with hundreds of addicts, and if an addict doesn't make staying sober their first priority, they're doomed. If anything else comes before it, they'll go back to using. When prisoners get out of prison, got a man who just got out of prison yesterday who's living out here in our back, in one of the outbuildings in our backyard. And yesterday, after he'd gotten out of prison and been there for 2 years, and gotten a sentence to be sentenced to 20 years of real love probation, if you can imagine, instead of being sentenced for the rest of his life to prison, he got back into town and he called me and he said, you know, he said, I got some shopping to do, and he said, I'll go to the probation office in another, couple of hours, and I'll be there at 4 o'clock. They close at 5. And I said, well, no, you won't. No, you'll go to the probation office right now. Because when you get out of prison, what did they tell you to do? He said, they told me to go straight to the probation office. I said, then you go straight there. You don't collect $200. You don't pass go. You don't do anything else. You go there. Now, nothing interferes with your probation. Nothing interferes with your freedom, or you're back in jail. And the same is true with you. You can't let anything interfere with you individually being happy. If you're not happy, how can you help the rest of your family? Your husband's drowning, and you can't drown with him, or nobody wins. So if that means that there are times, for example, when you say to him, do you know, George, for the next 2 weeks, I need a break. The word you used right here is, I just want to catch a breath. So for the next 2 weeks or month or whatever it is, I've just got to, I got to relax. My tank's getting empty. I need to feel more loved. I'm going to start calling some friends, get more loved every day. I'm going to go to a real love group. Call me. Whatever it takes. And so for those 2 weeks or a month or whatever it is, I'm really not going to speak to you. Not because you're a villain, but because I get emptied out too easily. I'm the problem. I'm not loving enough, and so for a month, we'll talk about, we can speak by email. We can say the kids need to be picked up at 4, dinners at 3, or whatever. We'll talk about details and mechanics, but I'm just not strong enough to be loving. So I got to catch my breath, just like you said here. You get to. You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders. Now, is that making sense? While you're thinking about that, somebody else said, I want to be loving to my husband, but how do I tell loving from clinging? Easy, no expectations. If you're loving your husband, you simply call him, you talk to him, you share with him whatever is important in your life, and you expect nothing in return. If you're clinging, then you expect something back. Make sense? That's what clinging is. You would call him, you expect an answer. You give him a gift, you expect a thank you. You spend time with him, you expect him to be grateful, recognize you, acknowledge you, something. So that's the difference between loving and clinging. And the person who asked about, needing to catch your breath, don't you hesitate to call me. I mean it. You get to the place where you feel stronger. Because if you're drowning, you can't help anybody. And you don't need to go back to drowning. That's not going to help. So I encourage you all, if you have questions, to please come back next week. Come back next Tuesday at 9. Bring people with you. Email friends and say, come back on. And we'll answer all your questions at 9 o'clock to 10 Eastern Time. Write them down during the week if you have questions. That's a great way to remember them. And it's been a great time being with you. And during the week, remember that it's always about real love.